As many African Americans and other Americans are celebrating Juneteenth on this day, let us make sure that we understand the full history of what transpired as far as the abolition of slavery in this country. There's a great article written by, I forgot who wrote it, but it is in the Marquette University Law School library. But there's a great article, When Did Slavery in America Really End? As many are celebrating Juneteenth because at June 19th in 1865, Major General Granger showed up in Galveston, Texas to inform the slave masters in Galveston that slavery was over and to free those slaves. That wasn't the end of slavery. At least over 250,000 people were still enslaved throughout the state of Texas at that time frame. And it still took months for representatives to go across the entire state of Texas and free everyone who was a slave in Texas. You see, many slave owners were trying not to tell their slaves that they were free because of the Proclamation of Emancipation in 1863. It was ratified in 63. It was written in 62. That all states who were in rebellion against the Union, that their slaves were free. And it wasn't until the 13th Amendment that freed all slaves in the Union completely. So many slave owners tried to hold on to their slaves to get in that last harvest, or because they just wanted to maintain the institution of slavery completely. So it still took months and months before those remaining slaves in Texas were actually freed. But June 19th marks the day that it was being enforced in one of the last states of the United States that was still holding slaves. Now, did that end slavery in what we call America? No, it did not. You see, the issue is that the Emancipation Proclamation only called for the end of slavery in states that were rebellious against the Union. One of the groups of people who were in rebellion against the Union, or who allied themselves with the Union, were the Indian territories in the area of Oklahoma and Nebraska, that area. Those who were formerly of the Trail of Tears, those 5 so-called civilized tribes who had adopted European mannerisms, and one of those mannerisms they adopted was the institution of slavery, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, the Creek. All these nations still held African slaves in their territory. And since they were an independent territory, they were not held to the standard of the Emancipation Proclamation. As a matter of fact, one of the last Confederate brigades that fought to end the battle, the Civil War, was an all Indian brigade. So they were allied with the Confederacy for the sole purpose and sole reason of the institution of slavery held by the Confederacy. So anytime somebody says it wasn't fought over slavery, just throw that one in there. So the Emancipation Proclamation didn't, and nor was it enforced with these Indian tribes. It wasn't until after the 13th, it wasn't until a year later, June 14th, and days after the 14th Amendment, which the 14th Amendment states that you are given the rights of a naturally born citizen of the United States. You see, Native Americans and slaves in the Indian territories were still not considered natural born Americans because they weren't part of the United States. That's the little caveat there. So it wasn't until that time frame, a year later, that a treaty was then formed, and the Creek Indians being the last ones to sign the treaty, where the Native American tribes had to absolve slavery within their territory if they wanted to remain in peaceful, maintain a peaceful relationship with the United States. So the last slaves to be freed actually were a year later, in 1866, because 14% of the civilized tribes population were African slaves. Now that lends to a whole nother discussion where people like Dane Calloway have been one of the biggest proponents that I've seen, who claim that we were already here. If we were already here, then how did those 5 tribes, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Seminole, how did those 5 tribes identify African slaves and themselves as indigenous people? In order for them to draw that line, they weren't already here. They were a different group of people. But this is also why you find many people who are African American or black or whatever you want to call yourself have that line in their family. I have that line in my family that goes to Creek Indians because of the fact that they were slaves to the Creek Indians. Some of them were even purchased as slaves to be husbands to the women because their population of men had been decimated by disease and by warfare, especially when you look at the history of the Creek and the Seminole Indians. You'll see a lot of that within their history. So slavery ended 1866 legally in the continental United States. It ended in 1865 in the government of the United States. And in truth, because of a messed up form of sharecropping, many people who were African American and some people who were disenfranchised poor people from Eastern European countries were held in a debt slavery situation, actually all the way up to the 1960s, and some even say into the 1970s, before true freedom was granted in America. So when people say that slavery was a long time ago, it wasn't as long as you think. As a matter of fact, there were many other things in black codes that allowed them to maintain a certain level of slavery and non-freedom to black Americans. As a matter of fact, in Galveston, Texas, it wasn't until 1872 that money was saved up by the black population to buy a park so that they can celebrate Juneteenth. Because Texas enacted a law that says that public gatherings of celebration like that were illegal. And when they did try to celebrate it in 1866 and 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, that they were accosted by the Caucasian population and in jailed and in prison, and utilizing the 13th Amendment, a whole nother form of slavery, because if you're imprisoned, you can then be used as cheap labor. So they even had to buy their own property in order to celebrate Juneteenth. And there are many other indications of laws like that. So as we celebrate Juneteenth, let us not forget the entire history concerning the abolition of slavery in America, and recognize that our ancestors have come a long way, and we still have yet a long way to go. And that a lot of the things that will bring about equality is up to us. It is not up to who we vote for. It is not up to what the president or the Congress or the Senate says, or even the Supreme Court. But it is how we raise our children. It is how we support businesses in our community and how the businesses in our communities support each other. It is how the religious societies within our communities actually utilize their power, influence, and finances to benefit the community. When we begin to internalize building our communities and building our families, that's when we'll start to recognize what true freedom is and what true equality is. It is not about oppressing others. It is about making our rightful claim to be treated equally and to be looked upon equally as anybody else would want, desire, and expect to be. So y'all have a great day. And remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.